Welcome to Module 4B, Works Cited Page. In this section, we will look at how to properly cite a source in your works cited page. We will take a look at various citation elements you need to be aware of, the details of how to put these elements together in the right order and with the right punctuation, and how to find the right information, as well as what to do if you can't find it. Citation elements include the following: author, title, title of container, other contributors, the version, the number, publisher, publication date, and location. Note your source may rarely have all of these elements, but you must be sure to cite every element that your source does have. Most sources will at least have number 1, the author, 2, the title, number 7, the publisher, and number 8, the publication date. But your source may have more than these 4, but we should look at a couple of examples and see some of the more basic as well as some of the more complex citations to see how each of these play a part. So here are a couple examples of some more basic citations. So first, of course, we see the author with the last name coming first, Shelley Bruce L. So Bruce L. Shelley is his full name. We list the last name first on our citation page. Followed, of course, by the title of the work, Church History in Plain Language. Note, it should be italicized. We'll go into details later on. Revised by R.L. Hatchett. So this would be one of the other contributors. The edition or version is 4th edition. Thomas Nelson is the publisher, and the publication date is 2013. Likewise, in the second example, we'll see some similar elements, but a few different things. Note, this one has 2 different authors. First, Gary D. Pratico. Note, Pratico is last name, functions first. While for the second author, we have the names in first name, last name. Miles V. Van Pelt. We, of course, then have the title, Basics of Biblical Hebrew, also in italics, followed by the version, the 2nd edition, the publisher, Zondervan, and the publication date, 2007. Note there were no revisers or editors involved, so in the second example, we don't have any other contributors because they were not listed in either the title page or the copyright page. And so here we can see we listed out all the information that we could find and put it in the proper order. So here are a couple more complex examples of how these elements fit together. So these two will both be part of a container that is a larger set of work. So first we see here, this is actually a chapter from a book, and each chapter is written by a different author. So in this instance, the author of the chapter is Stephen G. Dempster. He authored the chapter called Genesis in the book, What the Old Testament Authors Really Cared About, a survey of Jesus' Bible, which was edited by Jason DeRoshi in accordance with Krugel Publications, 2013. And we've got to note which page numbers that chapter comes from. The chapter's found between pages 61 and 79. So you can see we're taking a very specific example of citing a specific spot in a larger book, and we have to give more information of how to find that specific spot. However, MLA does make it a little bit easy on you when you're dealing with dictionaries and encyclopedias. So note the second example. J.A. Mocher has an article called Messiah in the New Bible Dictionary, the 3rd edition, 1996. Note what is missing here. We aren't given the editors of the New Bible Dictionary. We're not even given the page numbers of where the article is found. We're not given the publication information. The assumption is that you're able to find Messiah because dictionaries and encyclopedias are alphabetical. Versus a chapter, although if you know the Bible well enough, you know Genesis starts the book of the Bible, it actually is not chapter 1, it's chapter 2. So you have to give some more information of where to find it. Note, it comes later on in the book, namely pages 61 through 79. Versus Messiah, even if the New Bible Dictionary had multiple volumes, you simply have to find the volume that covers, say, M through P, and you'd be able to find the article on Messiah just fine. So less information is necessary because of how we know encyclopedias and dictionaries work. However, as always, check with your instructor. It is very important that you understand what their expectations are because they're ultimately the ones who are going to grade you, not me. So that being said, pay attention to all the information you can gather, and when in doubt, give more information, not less. Now that we know the basics of citation elements, let's look at how to format these elements properly. We've already numbered the elements in the order in which they appear in the citation page, so let's look at when to use periods and when to use commas. Periods will follow what we might call whole elements. That is, an element that does not describe other elements. For example, the author, number 1, is a whole element. It doesn't describe another element that came before it, but only itself. Likewise, number 2, the title is also a whole element. It doesn't describe any other elements that we looked at here. But if you look at elements 3 through 9, however, all of these use a comma to separate them because they all function to describe the location or the composition of element 2, the title. Now, after you go through all these elements, you use a period to complete the elements used. If, however, you have 2 containers, which can happen, you will finish talking about the container, its editors or translators, the version or the edition it might be, any numbers associated with publisher, publication date, and location, put a period, and then start with your second container and go through the list of any of these elements that also appear, all of which function to describe either the title or where the other container was found. Let's go ahead and look at these examples again, but specifically looking at not just the order, but the use of periods or commas. So as we mentioned, the author has a period that separates it from the rest because we've completed that element and it's a standalone element, a whole element. Followed by the title, church history in plain language, also has a period. Now what follows, all the rest of the information describes the work. Namely, the work was revised by R.L. Hatchett, so comma. We have more information that's also going to describe the same element. It is the 4th edition of Church History in Plain Language. Church History in Plain Language was published by Thomas Nelson, and it was published in the year 2013. And of course, we end it with a period. Likewise, we see the same thing. Author, even though it's 2 authors, it ends the author section with a period. The title also ends with a period. Whereas 2nd edition, Zondervan both have commas to indicate they're both describing the book. And of course, the entire section ends with a period at the end. Let's look at a couple of those more complex examples we looked at earlier and see how the commas and periods function with them. Here are these complex examples again. Let's take a look at how periods and commas play in this one as well. Of course, we have the author first, which is followed by that period, which you may have noticed, we haven't talked about it yet, is the comma after the last name. This is because we are acknowledging the last name has been taken out of its last place, right, and moved over to the first place position. So we're acknowledging it's been moved and that this is a last name, not a first name. But the author's element is finished with a period. Note that the title is now in quotation marks and not in italics because it's part of a book. We're quoting it, so to speak, from the larger container. So it's in quotations, but it still ends with a period. This is a little bit confusing here. Is the container, what the Old Testament authors really cared about, has a comma, not a period. This is where it kind of gets confusing. You say, well, isn't this a kind of a whole element situation? To a degree, yes, but it is functioning to describe where you can find this chapter in. This chapter is found inside of this larger container. So we can still use a comma with it, and likewise the rest of the elements edited by Jason Kuroshi, comma, Krugel Publications, comma, 2013, comma, page number 61 to 79, ends the element list, so we put a period to finish out the list. Similarly, down here, number 2, we have the author, last name followed by his initials. Messiah, once again, in quotations. You would need to put the period, right, after the title. New Bible Dictionary is the container. We have the comma, 3rd edition, comma, 1996, ends with that period. So we can see in these examples, it follows very similar rules. If, like I said, you had multiple containers, say you quoted this chapter from an online source, after finishing the container with the period, you would then list, say there's an author of the website, author, name of the website, and the title, on and on and on it goes. And that way you have all the information found, so you find all the information for the book, but if it was found through an online source, you have all the information of where to find that online source, to find this book, to find that article written by that author. So yes, it can be a little bit complex, but with some practice, you can get good at it. The last thing we want to talk about is how do we find this information? Most books will have a title page that will list usually the author, the title of container if there is one. Usually this is for a series of books. Any contributors, editors, translators, or stuff like that. Usually they'll have the version, if it's a 2nd edition, 3rd edition, 4th edition. If it's the number within a work, sometimes it will also be listed here. And we'll usually have the publisher at the very bottom of the page as well. So most of the information that you need can be found on the title page. However, there's also usually a copyright page, which will usually include elements 2, 3, and 7, but also, this is where you'll find element number 8, right? The publication date. Note, not all works indicate clearly the difference between the publication date and the copyright date. If you can find the publication date, it is preferred to cite that one unless it's referring back to an older edition, in which case you should cite the most appropriate copyright date for the version or the edition which you are using. So that being said, most information can be found at the beginning of most books. And I say most books. If you are dealing with books that have different authors for different chapters, usually we'll go to the table of contents and it'll give the name of the chapter and the author who wrote it. Dictionaries and encyclopedias, however, usually list the author at the end of the entry or article. Sometimes an article or chapter will be anonymously written. In these type of cases, you should skip the corresponding element that is absent, in this case the author. You don't know who the author is, but always double check and make sure you didn't miss anything. Some books will have a list of contributors at the beginning of the book and with a list of their contributions as well. So you have to be on the lookout to find this information. Generally, a lot of things are now uniform as far as how they should be presented, but not all books follow that same rule. So be keen to check the front, but also sometimes the back of the book for some of this information. If you do have any questions, be sure to contact your instructor and let them know I couldn't find it and that's why I didn't list it. The many will be able to help you if they're familiar with the type of work, and they might be able to afford you some advice on how to find it, especially if they know the work and know that there is an author or any other corresponding element that you said you could not find. So it takes some patience, it takes some digging at times, but by doing this work you will eventually get used to how to find and where to find all of this information. You have to admit, at first, this can seem like a lot of information, but ultimately you have to remember your goal is to communicate where you got your information from. So the more details you give, the easier it is for your readers to follow your research. So when in doubt, put more information in, but be sure to be short, precise, and understandable in doing so. It is not very good etiquette for writing to give whole sentences of where the information came from. Do your best to get it concise, get it precise, and understandable for your readers to find that information and get to it accurately. Thank you for watching this short video on how to put together a works cited page. I hope it was informative and helpful and clarifying. I will be putting some more links down below with some more specific examples of how these things play out in a works cited page. But ultimately, I hope that this was a step in the right direction. And as always, check with your professor before taking any of my advice.